Well, hello, fellers.
Hey.
What's up?
Not much. Just here to talk with you about Black Panther. You guys in the mood for a little bit of that?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Very ready.
If anyone is listening to this and they don't know us by our voices, I'll let you know. I'm John.
I'm Steve.
I'm Ron.
And this is episode 208 of the Movie Schmovie podcast.
Movie.
We were actually able to see an advanced screening of Black Panther this week, so we're here with a day and date episode. So this is always fun. We'll talk about general feelings, and then we'll maybe save some space at the end to talk about some things that might be spoilers, and we'll send you on your way. But I have a gut feeling that a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are also going to see this movie this weekend. What do you guys think?
I think so.
If that represents the number of people that listen to us, if that was equal to or greater than the number of people seeing Black Panther this weekend, we would all quit our day jobs, right?
Yes.
I mean, is that
We would. We had movie t-shirts.
Okay. Yeah, we'd have shirts. We'd probably sponsored Black Panther in some way. It would have been great. It would have been great.
It would have been.
Well, I don't have a shirt, and I don't know if you have a shirt, Steve, but Ronald has the shirt. That was one of my favorite aspects of the screening the other night, was that Ronald and his girlfriend Erin had matching Black Panther sweatshirts. And I don't know, how does the idea of wearing the matching clothes get started? But I think I've seen you guys do something similar before, and I find it very endearing. And it makes me feel like my wife and I, we really don't have it together when we go out. we don't coordinate at all.
Man, it's pretty exciting. And she picked out the t-shirt. It's like a mashup of the Punisher logo and Black Panther, and she picked it out. She thought it was cool. I was like, yes. It was such a great looking sweat. I think she's figured out my taste at this point.
right?
So,
Right. A little bit nerdy, a little bit cool.
right. Not too much of either one.
It looked really good on you, Ronald, but it looked a lot better on her. I'm just going to put that out there.
Oh man, I get it.
You'd probably agree with me, right? I mean, you probably...
Yeah.
If you know what's good for you, you should agree with me.
Yeah, absolutely. She looked incredible. She looked like a goddess. She looked amazing.
Well, I guess I bring that up because I feel like this is a movie where I have seen some indication all over Twitter. A lot of the people I follow have been talking about, treating the premiere or treating the screening of this movie as an event, treating it as something that is like a cause for celebration. We're associating that sort of thing in the past, or we have always associated with that sort of thing in the past with someone who wants to dress up as Boba Fett at the Star Wars screening or something, or Harry Potter. There's always a certain amount of cosplay that goes into it. But I think with Black Panther, for perhaps obvious reasons, it was different, but I think it's still worth talking about what it is about this movie that feels so momentous, even if it were not a movie that was quote unquote worth the hype. But I'm going to spoil my own feelings and say that I think that it lives up to the hype. But what do you guys think about that? The sort of moment this movie is arriving, the moment in the culture, and the moment for the audience, and the moment for maybe an audience that has been underserved by big budget superhero films up to this point.
I just remember the announcement through Kevin Feige years ago that Black Panther was going to be a thing. And I don't think, just in terms of, I guess, the last two phases, just how much it was being ramped up for what we're seeing in Infinity Wars in May. But something changed between those two phases. And you realize that you were getting closer to that 2018 date that you saw 2 years ago that mapped out all of the stuff for this phase. So, without being too crazy and emotional about it, I have always felt underrepresented in movies, particularly just for simpler things, like not just that somebody's not a superhero or the lead in something. It was just that African Americans weren't acting like anybody that I'd ever met in my life. You know what I mean? And to get to a point where that's a barrier within itself, because that's a lot of what's happening in Black Panther is talked about. But we got to talk about the basics, like just black people on screen that have decent dialogue, that isn't broken, incoherent, under the spell of drugs. All of that stuff has always been a thing that I've seen. So getting past that, to just see two people speaking on the screen that are coherent, that are intelligent, that love each other is something I don't see very often. And then the fact that it's a superhero movie, come on. I mean, like, Blade was like the last one I saw, and I loved Blade. I never take anything away from it, but it was, his character was never fleshed out the way that this was allowed to be done. So it means a lot. It means a whole lot. It means a lot to me as a little kid. It means a lot for. I kind of wish my grandmother was alive to see this. You know what I mean? She saw Obama get elected. I wish she would have been able to at least see the commercial. You know? Yeah. So yeah, that's my feelings. I know it's a little jumbled and kind of thrown together, but it's one of these movies that kind of throws my emotions out of whack. You know what I mean? Like it's overwhelming, and it feels like we're leaning towards something kind of promising, and that it feels like a barrier is being broken. It feels like it almost, the genre has been so segregated. It almost feels like integration in a way. You know what I mean? I know that sounds nuts, but there's something about movies with black people being perceived as black movies that aren't accessible, and this being a black movie that feels accessible. Like every other story I've ever seen about black people, it's accessible to anybody. I'm glad that this is a thing that's starting to become a thing. So that's all.
Yeah, no, I think everything you said is 100. I mean, for me, looking from the outside, as growing up, I mean, I'm sure John would agree with me, speaking as a white male in this society, like coming from a place of privilege, where, like you just said, Ronald, like 95, if not more, I don't know what the number is, like percent of stories being told are, people or persons that look like me, like that's a place of privilege, and I've benefited from that. But I mean, I can watch a movie and appreciate, just like you said, like every black film that you've ever seen that's labeled as a black film, it literally is a story that really anybody should be able to relate to. Just like you have found, in many ways, you have found a place to relate to movies that aren't based around people of color, or a story all about women, how we can still watch a film like that and find relation to it. So, I mean, growing up the way I have and seeing films the way I've been able to see them, I think it's no exaggeration to say, like, this kind of movie and the stage that it's on is like, it really is a cultural moment. It's like a historical moment. And you said something that is like literally the best way to put it is that my impression of watching films that is a predominantly black cast, or a film that's been directed or written or features a lead black actor, there's always a conversation about like it being a black film, and it's about something that only black people can relate to. And that's been really weird, because I've watched plenty of those films myself, and I enjoy a lot of them. And I don't understand the reason that it's labeled like that, like you just said. So, to see a movie like this earlier this year, a film like Girls Trip come out, that's an all black female cast and all women, and be so fucking funny, and like literally the funniest movie of the year, and being as successful as it is a way to prove that those films are accessible by everyone. And then a movie like this to come out this year, a Marvel Studios film on the largest stage that movies come out anymore, and not just here in the States, but just worldwide. It is the most important kind of platform, to provide a film like this for everybody, and for especially people of color. And, when you were saying, like, if it's like one black actor doing this or one black actor doing that, I mean, this is a cast that's filled up of like some of the most beautiful people I've ever seen, and like some of the best actors out there working right now. And they are on full display for everybody to enjoy, but especially for you to enjoy, because you've never had that kind of opportunity before. So, I mean, it is amazing. It was a great experience to be able to watch it with you guys and know how much you appreciate it and what it means to you, and to me, and to people that appreciate that kind of representation. But it's no exaggeration to say that this movie is going to be a monster film. It's tracking above any other superhero movie ever. Like, not just recent Marvel movies, like ever. Like, it's pre-sold more than any superhero film ever, only behind the most 3 recent Star Wars films. So that just shows you like what anticipation there is for this film. And like John said earlier, like it's not, it doesn't hurt it, and it's crazy good for it that it's actually a really good film. And I don't know. It's just like it's one of those things in your lifetime when you see a movie and you feel like just how special this movie is going to go down in history. Like when we're older, and maybe you're talking to your kids and you're talking about this kind of film coming out. Like, I don't mean to sound exaggeratory or whatever that proper word is, like to exaggerate this, but like this is a really, really, really important movie, and it's especially special to me because people that knock the superhero genre and things like that criticize it and feel like it's getting tired, like this is the platform that provided this kind of representation, and it's like the biggest scale that you could ever imagine when it comes to movies. So, God, the anticipation's been insane, for so many different reasons, and just being able to see how literally everybody is excited to see this film is an experience. And I mean, like looking at movie theaters today, like how many are sold out? Like we're recording this the night before it opens or the night of that they have the preview shows. Like pretty much everything is sold out. Like the Senator Theater here in town never sells out hardly ever anymore. And like their show tonight is sold out. Wow. And I mean, that's a huge house. And it's sold out. It's like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock show or whatever it is. It's just amazing. Like, I think it's an amazing experience to be able to see this film and to see the representation on the screen. And man, it really helps that they have an amazing character on their hands. And it's amazing. Like, I don't know. It's just everything Ronald said is 100% true. And I'm so happy that that representation is there, that you can finally. You see yourself, you can, like you said, you can see yourself in this character because he looks like you, and you don't really see that. Like Blade was your only other option. That's fucking ridiculous.
Right.
And
right.
And hopefully that's a thing of the past, because hopefully this opens the door for many other kinds of representation on film, and especially, if this is the kind of genre that lets people do it because, they put so many movies out and they have such tentpole films and huge casts, like. Do it, use it, make it happen. That's all I have to say.
I think one of the things that really stood out to me was when you mentioned, Ronald, the wait. When they announced Black Panther, when they said they were doing it, we waited, and then we heard he was going to be in Civil War, and that was almost 2 years ago now. That was great. He kind of stole that movie, and everyone came out of that movie saying, what I really want to see now, I'm excited about all this other Marvel stuff, but what I really want to see now is the Black Panther movie.
Right.
That's one thing I will say for this Marvel model. As much as it can sometimes seem like an assembly line, and we've talked about how we wonder if we'll ever just be overwhelmed by product, but they do really seem to give each movie its development phase, its sort of ramp up, and then a period where it's the special jewel, where it's the thing that's getting pushed. And for whatever the wait may have been, however long it may have seemed like they were dragging their feet getting this movie made, they started late, but once they started doing it, you can really see all of that development on the screen. This is not a movie that felt rushed. This is not a movie that felt like it was thrown out there to meet a demand. We're in this phase where they are now, at least they had Taika Waititi make a Taika Waititi movie, They had Ryan Coogler make a Ryan Coogler movie. I don't think that Marvel has shed the criticism that they have a house style. But I think this is proof that they've gotten to this point where there are all these other directions that they see the movies can go in, and it's economically viable for them to have a Black Panther universe that is almost like a universe within the Marvel universe, a whole new setup. So you can see it, you were mentioning, Steve, the box office. You can see the dollar signs. You can see the excitement. I've got friends dressing up in matching sweatshirts. This is a movie that's tapping into something. I'm excited about it. I can't wait for people to see it. I'm going to see it again with my wife and son. Like it did kind of start slow, and it took a little time to develop the characters in the world. But everything that felt a little slow about the beginning of the film, by the time it was over, all of that stuff had deeper meaning, and it became apparent why they needed to spend that time setting things up.
Right.
There's so many major plot beats that you could predict from the trailer or just from what you know about story, but what makes it satisfying is the attention to detail and the care that was taken bringing this world to the screen, as though they are saying, whether Ryan Coogler wants to make 10 of these films or something, but they're kind of saying this is a world that can be expanded on and can be delved into. So yeah, it really did feel like something big in so many different ways, culturally and just in terms of the fact that it's this overdue bit of representation and how well it handles that it doesn't just represent, it actually has, it kind of flips the script on representation, I mean, there's just a lot of faces of color in this film, and it doesn't feel like it's fueled. Now, of course, it's still being made for Disney, but it doesn't feel like it's fueled by the same sort of Anglo-centric concerns that normally fuel sci-fi, fantasy storytelling. And I think that's, I don't know, just very exciting. And I think that what we can look at is that Ryan Coogler assembled a team from the top down, people who probably were really trying to make this movie count. They were kind of showing you something you hadn't seen before. And that's what this movie was for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think the palette of the whole movie was pretty incredible. So, I mean, oh, my computer's going nuts. I apologize. So yeah, I was a big fan of visually. It was like a feast of the eyes. Like Steve was saying, everybody in the movie is beautiful. So that's in the African environment with all the colors, all the garb, all that stuff was nuts to look at. And I know that the designer is actually a Hamden, Virginia college graduate who made that stuff. So that's pretty interesting. So visually, yes, it was beautiful. It was like a painting. So I don't know.
Let's maybe talk about some of the things that really did make the movie work. You mentioned the cast, and we talked about how beautiful they are, but the talent in terms of what people brought to their performances. It's interesting how Chadwick Boseman stole Civil War, and then I feel like 3 or 4 different people stole Black Panther from him. And I don't mean that as a knock on him.
Well,
He's got this extremely strong central performance, but there's a few very, very charismatic characters kind of circling him. I don't know if anybody wants to point out a favorite. I would just kind of, first I'll throw out there that Winston Duke's character of M'Baku.
First movie ever. Yeah, Winston Duke. Lupita, of course, is one that jumps out to me. Obviously, Michael B. Jordan, man. Michael B. Damn Jordan.
He's so good.
He is the best. He's the best Marvel villain that's happened in this world so far. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think. Okay. But that honestly, that's not a hard thing to do. But I think we feel a lot more invested in who this guy is. This is the first Marvel movie that I've seen concentrate on the villain enough that you understand their motives for doing anything. It's not like at the end he's just like, and so I want to crush the world. And you have no idea why, besides he just is angry and doesn't understand why people live the way that they live.
In another movie, that character wouldn't have even been a villain.
Right.
I mean, it's great for Michael B. Jordan because he can handle that level of subtlety in the character. But I do think, when I was saying before that this is a very character-driven movie, that's one of the ways that manifested for me, was that it wasn't really driven as much by good versus evil as it was by just an ideology versus another ideology. And you could really make a case for either point of view. Maybe some of the means to the end are what you would debate, but the actual point of view of Michael B. Jordan's character was not the typical megalomaniacal villain who wants to take over the world.
Right. It was based in some real understandable truths about it, which is super interesting. I could actually hear people when he said what he was gonna do. People were like, "Oh, that's it." Like literally, that was strange.
Right. I mean, you see his motivation so clearly, and like John was saying, like maybe in another movie or even in this movie, really, like you hear the motivation and you say, like, that's actually like the moment that you start to actually understand and like kind of sort of almost like sort of side with him a little bit, any kind of character like this kind of, portrayal, like, something's working. You know that the fact that you're sympathizing with what he's gone through and like how that's really informed his outlook on the world and how he thinks it's appropriate, to go about doing what he wants to accomplish. Like what he wants, for fairness and for quality. Like it's on the most, at the bottom of it, the common denominator is what most people would probably want, is some sort of fairness or like equality. It's just turned up to a level that's a bit more nefarious and a little more, he's killing people, like his means are really what are questioned. But yeah, the moment that you start to sympathize for him and start feeling for him, even after watching what he's doing to characters on the screen, you're like, okay, so this is absolutely working, and like this is how villains should be approached in a world like where his intent is literally not to blow up the entire galaxy. It's really to address something that's directly affected him and people that look like him and that are like him, and that he's seen as happening throughout his whole life. And I mean, like that's on a lowest possible level, like that's legitimate and that's real, and that is it's a fact. I mean, that shit's real, and that's Definitely. What his motivation is. So yeah, he was incredible in it, and I mean, like his portrayal, that character is great. I want to say, literally everybody else that was mentioned, as I agree, everybody's been great. But I think my kind of standout, almost stealing the movie in some ways, with Letitia Wright as Shuri, his sister. Legit, I'm crushing on her hard, man. Like she is adorable,
super charming, super confident.
The fact that she's a genius and she has tech that would rival Tony Stark's tech, and in some ways I can't wait to see how all this stuff figures into Infinity Wars and her role in that. But I mean, her sense of humor and like her and T'Challa's like relationship and their shorthand and just like how playful she is, but yet she's so quick to think on the run. I mean, God, she was so good in the movie, and she's hilarious. And a lot of their scenes together, like with that brother sister, little poking at each other, like that stuff worked so well in the movie. And among a whole cast of amazing women in the film, in different ways, they steal the movie. But I mean, like her, for me, I thought she was just incredible.
You got to give props to that, because it's a character that kind of just walks up, and you, by the end of that little first moment, that first interaction with T'Challa, you totally get their relationship, and the fact that she turns out to sort of be his cue, in terms of the James Bond comparison, that she's the one who's got the gadgets, and she's the one who's sort of the Tony Stark, the inventor in the lab.
Right.
Yeah, that was so fun to see. We're talking about all these great characters that were new to us. I think another character that really stood out to me because of just how. I mean, Andy Serkis is an incredible actor.
He is.
I thought the energy and the qualities he brought to Claw in this, again, we've seen this character before, and this is a slightly different incarnation of the character. He feels a little bit more wild, but he's just amazing. And I think that obviously he's got a physicality to his performances that is very intentional and very studied, because he does the motion capture work, and that I almost look at him and wonder, has he just gotten to the point where he can't help but move like an ape? But he was hilarious, and he was so like sleazy and just the right sort of. I mean, if you look at this film as a kind of Bond film where you have these kind of low life criminals and bad guys that have to kind of turn on each other and all this stuff, he was a great guy to have in that position. The sort of thug style bad guy. He's got a pretty cool power.
He has one of the craziest laughs I think I've ever heard on screen. It's like this deep cackle with a lot of spit, and
it works so well.
Yes, he was incredible in that movie, because I think people. So I've been reading like people saying that they thought he was a little over the top, but you kind of have to be crazy to do some of the things that he was doing in this world. So I kind of like that. I kind of like that he was like almost like unhinged. Even when he was in handcuffs, it still felt like he could do something.
Yeah,
because he felt so like a big dude, like just very. I don't know. You just never knew what he was going to do. I like that a lot. So
it's a little thing too. Like I love how good his South African accent is in the movie.
Right. It's
and like I'm really like you really pick up on that stuff, like how a lot of actors have maybe a good starting in the film, and like you can hear it drop in and out throughout the movie. But I mean, he's obviously like the top of the line kind of professional. Like he's just so committed to anything he does. But I just had to say, like I appreciate how authentic and clean that South African accent sound the whole film. Like it didn't change. And I love that about him.
Yeah.
You're right about the accents kind of wobbling on some folks, and there was a little bit of a I couldn't tell. Sometimes somebody would hit their accent a little harder for one scene or another, and I'd never know if stuff shot out of sequence.
Right.
Did the person get better at their accent as they went along?
Yeah, you could definitely hear that sometimes.
I did read how they tried to strip away any kind of European influence in the inflection, because Wakanda is supposed to be a society that hasn't had influence from outside ever.
Right. That's cool.
So I did, but I think I read that Chadwick Boseman said something about the accent that he kind of invented for the character. Maybe that was in Civil War, that he tried to do an African accent that did not have traces of colonial influence. Which is actually an interesting theme of the film. I guess before we get too much into spoilers, it's safe to mention that the film does deal with the idea of isolationism, and there is a kind of interesting way that Wakanda, which does seem a bit like a utopian Afrofuturist paradise, it also has this sort of, it addresses the implied historical period during which awful things were happening in Africa to Africans, and Wakanda was sitting
And
by
just kind of like
and not,
hanging out. Yeah.
not
yeah.
Right.
not spreading the wealth of their technology. And I think that that's a really, I mean, again, this movie gets into some pretty interesting, sophisticated places. You were saying about how the villain is maybe one of the better villains. We were talking about how the motivation of that villain is more identifiable, or at least relatable as a human motivation. Yeah. But I think one of the reasons why that stuff works too is that it does feel like, without trying overly hard to make it a political film, they did link it to some real world issues, or at least place that fantasy idea of Wakanda in a real world context, where you have to say, okay, so Wakanda is guilty as well of standing by while these awful things have happened, and that gives something good for T'Challa to sort of represent a change in the way things are done. It makes him special as a character.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious from either of you. I mean, I have a couple of my own, but like, did you have anything? Did anything in the film kind of bother you, or was there any kind of criticism that is not so positive that you had coming away from the movie?
I had a few little things, like things that are like normal nitpicks of this type of film that I would say were sort of overwhelmed in the moment by the experience of just like all the reasons we've said why this was an exciting movie to see.
I actually had something. I mean, like John and I were talking a little bit about this after the movie. Mm-hmm. But the thing, like one of the things, and this is probably one of these things that like fall into all these, or at least a lot of these comic book movies. The entire film, I actually made it a point in my mind. Like I thought about like halfway through it, I was like, wow, there's been a pretty great action sequence in this movie, and like I did not think about the CG aspect of it really all that much at all. Like I thought that it was really well handled. And I didn't really find that I was noticing a lot of like CG work. Obviously, there's tons on display, but it didn't feel, detached from it, or didn't look kind of sloppy like a lot of these movies become. But I did feel like there's a moment in the end of the film, a fight sequence, that really kind of fell apart, and it really, kind of stood out to me as like one of the only real negative things I can say about the movie, and it's really not affecting the story at all. It's literally like an aesthetic, and it just seems like it happens sometimes, or a lot of times in these movies, in like the final act, in the final showdown, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a moment where Black Panther and Killmonger are fighting, and it's this sequence that is straight out of like Spider-Man 3, and it just looks like they just become so rubberized, and like I felt like it just got really sloppy, where there's so much happening and they're both in dark suits and it's dark, and it's like, can we get away with this because of that? And even watching it in shitty ass 3D where it looks darker even still, it's like that scene really stood out to me because it just seemed like everything else was so well handled. I mean, and there's literally even an earlier scene in the movie where there's a fight sequence literally in the dark, and it's like shot really well to like let the gunshots like light up the fight sequence, and that was like really awesome. But this scene, this final showdown between the two of them, gets a little crazy for me. I mean, like that rubbery CGI body flinging kind of stuff. If you've seen a fight in Spider-Man 3 that I'm referring to between Venom and Spider-Man, you know what I'm talking about. But that's really one of the big like technical aesthetics that really kind of stood out to me. Otherwise I felt like most of the other stuff looked great. I mean, like you guys said, the cinematography, like Rachel Morrison did this film, who's nominated for an Oscar currently for Mudbound, it's gorgeous. And like you said, it's like stunning how beautiful Wakanda is. And even when they leave Wakanda, like all the scenery everywhere looks great. I thought the score was great. Same composer that Ryan Coogler used for Creed. A lot of great builds, a lot of great scene setting. But that CG stuff always just kind of catches me. And I just don't understand, like, when these movies cost this much money, how they haven't figured out to get that right, that it does not look like that.
Right.
And it just really gets to me, especially when you have a movie going as well as this one is, and it's like, and it's really good. It's like, God damn it, if you could just get this shit right, like,
right.
it would just, it takes it next level, for me at least.
Sometimes I would rather just see people on wires. You know what I mean? Like, seeing a physical body, because there's things that, like, mathematically don't make any sense in your head when you're seeing it happen. Like, when somebody jumps up in the air and they show that, like, kind of freeze frame, that body shouldn't look like it's, like, 10 feet long because they're showing, like, a top shot. It just doesn't look right. It's just, you know, it's jarring. It's a jarring thing.
Maybe that's just a factor of the way that these movies are made, that there's a point at which the effects could continue to get better and better, but unfortunately they have to release them. And so they release with the best that they have, you know, because you'll see a shot in a trailer that will look better by the time the film is out, that they will have improved on the effects in it. Yeah. So I do think that there is something about just relying too much on what might be the pre-visualization of those scenes that are essentially cartoon animated scenes with actors' faces stuck in them after the fact. And those might be the scenes that are the most kind of, that the rest of the movie has to kind of work around, because those are the scenes that they start developing early. Right. And maybe the scenes where a director like Ryan Coogler, I don't know this, but maybe he's kind of chained to a scene like that once it starts getting put in motion, and everything else is you know, you can reshoot some character stuff here, or you can decide how some of these other moments are going to play, but this stuff is set in stone. And it does sometimes seem like they're just relying on it too much, like they breezed past the point where they didn't quite perfect it, and maybe they're saying it's stylized action, and therefore let's err on the side of giving you something exciting rather than something that looks grounded. But in this movie especially, it would have been nice to see them avoid that rubbery kind of spaghetti body stuff that you're talking about. And you mentioned the score. I want to say, as much as I enjoyed the score, and I love the way the score incorporated the Kendrick Lamar stuff as well, I wondered how much that was going to be just a companion piece versus a part of the score, and I was pleased to see that was incorporated. But there's something that they did repeatedly in the score, and it's at moments where it's supposed to have an emotional impact, and it really is just through overuse. That the single wailing male voice singing, the African style of singing, that, I mean, it's like Lion King singing. It's like, it's been done so much to evoke Africa that every time it happened in this movie, it just felt incredibly cheesy to me. And I feel bad to say that, because it's like a, you know, it's just a traditional style of singing, but it's been done so much. Like, whenever someone wants to make it feel like this is Africa, they have that, you know, that singing and the shot of the horizon. And it's like, it doesn't matter how well done it is at this point. It'd be like playing Bad to the Bone when you show someone walking into a pool hall in a movie. To me, it just feels like a cliched choice. So that was an area where I felt like an otherwise interesting score that kind of went back and forth between these tribal rhythms and you know, traditional Marvel style thematic score. There is sort of a Black Panther theme in there somewhere, but the overall effect you get from it is this kind of pulse, this rhythm behind the movie that really, I don't know, it's just another thing that made the movie feel slightly different and slightly more of a piece with itself and its world. So I feel like I had other little, you know, nitpicky complaints. You were talking about the accents. I know Martin Freeman is a great actor, but whenever he does an American accent, he wobbles just a little bit. His Midwestern accent on the Fargo TV show was kind of halfway good as well. But I enjoyed him in this film a lot. But his accent was kind of, you know, sometimes it sounded real New York, and other times sounded kind of like his native tongue is slipping out a little. But
yeah, what about you, Ronald?
I'd say maybe pacing. That's really about it. But there were. I don't think all people know that, like, the slow beginning and then accelerated sort of thing it could be kind of weird if you're really paying attention to how much the pacing changes. But that's it. That's really maybe pacing.
I guess now we can say we're going to talk a little bit about plot stuff that's kind of going into light spoilers.
Sure.
That opening scene of the film felt to me like kind of a weird opening scene for the movie, like kind of an unengaging scene,
right,
you know?
Right.
But as the movie goes along, that you see the importance of that scene. We see why that interaction was interesting, and that the players in that room are actually characters whose motivations we understand, and et cetera. But it felt like an odd way to start the movie. And then I think the next half hour or so was similar to me. It felt like they were getting us into this world, and it just felt like an odd point to kind of start the story and get things going. But I think in retrospect, a lot of that stuff would feel like foreshadowing or world building that gets paid off within the 2 hours.
Right.
But so I don't know. Do you think that would be the case, Ronald, or do you think you would still just think overall that the movie had kind of a slack pace?
You know what? Because of it, actually, yeah, maybe. Well, it kind of relates to my feelings about it are kind of related to something that I was not sure that they were going to kind of focus on, and that's something that I wanted Steve to kind of see. The idea that he could lose his kingdom and all that stuff kind of at the drop of a hat between a battle. And I thought that was incredible. And I didn't know, I got a little afraid of if they were going to be able to tell that story in the amount of time that happened after that first kind of slower sort of set of scenes. So that's it.
Did you say you wanted me to see that?
Yeah, I wanted you to see that because I thought, I think, of all the characters that exist in this world, his is the most volatile. Like, it could leave him at any point, and he could be challenged at, whenever the ceremony happens. So, like, that's really cool.
That was
that
was all. I loved seeing that. That's like a stakes thing that we always talk about the movies. Like you see it happening in the first movie, and you're like, whoa, like this can happen that quick,
right?
So I definitely see what you're saying. I kind of feel like I overall agree with the pacing issue. I do really think. See, I kind of disagree a little bit about I kind of really like the opening scene, only because it threw me off immediately, and I like the idea of like not jumping right into like even though this picks up after Civil War, I like the idea of being dropped into a flashback to early 90s Oakland, or whatever, and just kind of being like, wait, how does this play into Black Panther? Because, like, none of that stuff has been in any of the marketing, any of the trailers, anything like that. And, an actor shows up in that flashback that, I knew was involved with the movie somehow, but I wasn't really sure what his role in the movie was. So that really kind of disarmed me a little bit, which I liked, because then that made me wonder what was coming in the film. But the part I do agree with what you're saying is I did feel that, like, for the first, like, I don't know, 35 to 50 minutes, it did really feel very slow to me. Like, which I don't know, I don't really knock it too much for it, because overall, like, I do feel like a lot of it pays off. But relating to that feeling, I think, is the fact that the moment that I get to see Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger at that museum, I was really excited to see more of him, and then for him to go away for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes felt weird. Like, I feel like that's my only other, I didn't get to say it earlier, but like the only other real criticism I had was that I liked that character so much, and like I wanted to know more about Killmonger, and maybe a little less through some of the exposition that we get from Everett Ross later in the film. But like, I just wanted to see more of what his motivations were and what he had to do with this whole vibranium thing, and like what his role in the movie was going to be. So I felt like that's what like kind of threw the pacing off for me a little bit, because I was digging the opening scene, slowed down a little bit, saw him, I was like, okay, this is really fucking cool, like he's awesome. And seeing him with Claw was really cool, and then it literally, I feel like he is not on the screen for like at least a half an hour. And that was really weird to me, because as good as Chadwick Boseman is as T'Challa, like his performance, which I think is completely intentional, is a little more quiet and stoic and regal and wise, and
and reserved.
Exactly, like, and that is that character, and he's great because he is that. But that character doesn't jump off the screen like his sister did, or like the guard did, or I can't remember the character's name. or Winston Duke's character, or especially Eric Killmonger, Ian Baku. Yeah, I just felt like that seemed like a weird thing to me, that he went away for quite so long, and I think that kind of just punctuated how weird that first hour or so was pacing wise, because it was like kind of revving up and then it would slow back down into this world building and, you know, character building, which is fine, but I don't know. It's weird. Like, I definitely can't wait to see it again, and I don't know if that will feel any differently to not go in like with these crazy expectations that we all had. But yeah, there was something definitely interesting about the pacing of the first hour or so for me, because I feel like once Killmonger comes back into the story, that last hour of the movie, hour and 10 minutes of the movie, is fucking great.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really, really good. And like you can feel the movie like really not letting up once he comes back into the storyline, and it just moves. It moves at that point, and it feels, like Ronald said, volatile. And his place is like, and there's so much being shaken up, and you're unsure of all this stuff. And I just love that last hour of the movie. Like, it's really good.
Right.
Well, what do you think of the kind of chance they take of sort of knocking T'Challa out of his own movie for a little chunk there in the middle? Because he neither yielded nor was killed by Killmonger when he lost that challenge. So technically, he didn't really lose the challenge. I mean, if we accept the sort of rules as laid out in the previous challenge.
Right.
But I thought that was an interesting choice to sort of take the character down so low and, you know, knock him out of the movie for, I don't know how long it actually is, maybe 10 minutes or something, 10 or 15 minutes tops. But it felt like, oh, what is this movie going to be now that Black Panther is not front and center in the story? And it I guess all that world building they did in the first hour, that's when it really started to pay off, was because there were tons of characters that you were still interested in following, even though T'Challa was conked out for a little bit there. What did you think of that? And just in general, Ronald, how did you like the plot?
I liked it a lot. I mean, the fact that he had such a crazy loss so early was pretty incredible. I mean, just so you understand the inner workings of it, and it became a thing where, like, the balance of who T'Challa is way more important than how strong he is physically. It's his people skills. It's his love for, you know, his people, his love for his team that kind of wins over everything else, which is really interesting. I've never seen anything kind of handled that way. So yeah, it does have some traditional beats, and I think that's just to make it palatable, right? Like, this, like, you're already dealing with a world that's a little more complicated than anyone that we've been plopped into, and then the safety is in kind of the pretty reasonable beats in a story that have different twists to them than I've ever seen in some cases. So I think that helped a lot. Just that I was experiencing it a little differently. It kind of reminded me of when Batman gets his back broken in the Christopher Nolan series.
Yes.
It reminded me a lot of that.
Yeah. It was done kind of similarly, just in the way that, like, Batman had to recover and train again and all that stuff, and it happened early. And to see somebody come back from it, and, you know, with the help of so many people, and women in particular, is nuts. So yeah, I like that part of it. So I mean, and I say the pacing thing not to say that it puts any, like, minus on any of the damn near perfect score that I'm giving it, but I know that a tighter first act would have made me, you know, I'm already doing flips. I probably would have did flips with like some sort of fiery, torchy sort of thing if if the pacing was better in the first act. So
yeah, I actually think that the part where he kind of goes away for a bit is actually just a kind of like a show of confidence in how much they believed we would be okay with being with every other character in the movie for that period of time. Right. And I think that it's handled really well. And I think early on in the film, like when he's having his vision, I think T'Chaka tells him, like, it's all about who you surround yourself with and the people that you trust. And like, I feel like literally the movie is trusted in their hands when he goes away. And I think that's a huge asset to this film, to whatever this franchise becomes. The fact that you can spend time with, his sister, his mother, Killmonger, M'Baku, like there's so much being built around him outside of who he is and who his superhero alter ego is. It's like I was completely fine with waiting to see what happens with him because those characters were driving the story for me. And it's bold. I think it's a bold choice. Much like Ronald just said, like the Batman thing, it made me think of that actually as I was watching it. But it was like, I think it was well played and well set by having these characters that, could keep us invested in the story while they let that play out for a bit. So, I was into it too.
This Marvel world just got so much richer because of this movie. And I think that's an interesting thing, is that this movie manages to have its own identity, but also if you're looking at the bigger picture of the connected universe, this is a great new element that can be part of that. But I feel like it's sort of a halfway point between a movie like Logan that really does feel like it exists on its own terms as a movie and the sort of Marvel house style. I think Ryan Coogler was able to pull off something pretty amazing within that structure.
Yeah.
When I think about worlds outside of Earth, I think about the second Thor in particular, which I don't know how I felt about any of that, any of the world outside of the Earth that felt very like unlike anything that we were seeing, right? Now, when you're dealing with a place that's on Earth that almost looks like it's in some like, I don't know, it's isolated in a pretty amazing way. And because of that, they take liberties in terms of, the fear that all of us had as, comic book readers had was, how will Wakanda look? And it looks like it's paying homage to current culture, and then adding some futuristic stuff to it, which I really liked. It just felt like you could picture yourself being there, and that's a big thing, obviously, too. Just the perception that Africans are poor and unable to support themselves and all that stuff, which is the furthest thing from the truth. And just to see it happen on screen is huge. So, I apologize for just not talking about all this stuff as much as I can, but there's really, we can rate this movie all we want, but there's nothing really to compare it to. Like, I don't know what to compare it to. Every time that somebody asks me about the movie, I'm like, I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like whatever this like interesting idea that there are areas that are just untouched by anybody but the people that are native to it is a very, very interesting, amazing concept. And I think that everybody, regardless of what race you are, should be afforded that luxury to be in a place rather than be taken to a place by force. And that within itself is a really interesting thing. And it's a point of conflict between Killmonger and Black Panther. There's a lot of layers going on when those two are talking. Some of it is like the culture that we've been brought into, that is almost like, it's very hard to describe to somebody who is not a native of the United States as a minority. Talking to a person who's lived in this place comfortably his whole life. That's a crazy conflict. And he's like, you don't deserve any of this. You didn't earn it. I need to take this over and I'll run this better than you do. It's a crazy concept to picture as a conflict between two characters. but somehow they make it palatable. Like it's a very like you could watch it and be like, oh, okay, this is about a guy who was kicked out of his place that he lived and came back, and he wants control again, right? Or there's so many layers that are like related to what Americans are going through, what, you know, people in Africa are going through, and how these parallels are drawn in a very easy to understand idea for the average, you know, just a person that's watching it. And then somebody who knows about the diaspora and all that stuff, and the travels and all the crazy stuff that came with slavery, and the perception of our perception of Africa that's been given to us versus their perception of Africa that's been given to them too. I'm sorry, of America that's been given to them. And I found that when either party goes to, you know, to the opposite place, that opinion kind of quickly vanishes. And you realize how much of the narrative's been controlled by somebody who doesn't look like you. So that is all very like heavy stuff that they tackle in a very, that's magic, to be completely honest with you. I've seen so many movies that were so heavy-handed about that message, they were almost unbearable. And I'm watching a kids movie that's discussing this almost in like a very like Schoolhouse Rock sort of way, for lack of a better comparison. Like it's like a kid can watch this as a kid and be like, oh, this is cool. It's just about two people that don't like each other. Then if you watch it as an adult, you're like, holy shit, what? So I love that about it. So that within itself is legitimately a small miracle.
I just think the fact that it sits in the real world, but it doesn't strain too hard to comment on the real world, is a thing that I don't want to require it of every tentpole popcorn movie, but it's really very cool. It's a real feather in the cap of this movie that it's able to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, I have one final little tidbit about the movie that I think is kind of interesting, but otherwise I don't know if I have much else to say about it. Do you guys?
Nah, I think anything, Steve, you can think of?
I definitely can't wait to see it again. Like it's a really good problem to have when, you know, you have such anticipation for a movie and you go in and you really enjoy it, that like you really are asking yourself, like, I find that I'm asking myself, like, how much did I enjoy it? Like the anticipation, it overwhelms me. It overwhelmed me, like, with this movie. Like I literally could not wait to see it, and like I just need to see it again. Like I'm having people that friends of mine have asked me about it since we saw it. Like, you know, well, how would you rank it in the Marvel movies? Like I really don't know. Like I mean, I don't know where it falls in my favorite Marvel movies, but I mean, it's got to be in the conversation. You know, like it's really well done. I mean, like I don't know. Like I need to see it at least a couple more times to be able to say like where I would slot it in among my favorite Marvel movies. But I do think that everything that we've talked about tonight in terms of like, you know, the story that it was telling and just how important the movie is, like those things count towards where that movie falls, at least for me, in the ranking of the films. And it's not something that I feel like anybody can fully appreciate with a movie like this until you see it more than once, because there's so many things to consume and to process just beyond the film itself. You know, like, you know, you want to judge the movie on the movie itself, but there's like an experience happening around this film. Like I'm almost like intrigued enough to maybe go out and like see the movie tonight, you know, like with the crowd seeing it on opening night, because I feel like it feels like that kind of thing. Like you gotta experience this, because it doesn't happen a whole lot. But it's definitely a super solid Marvel film, but take the Marvel part out. Like it's a super solid movie, period.
I don't know. At this point, I really don't know who in the general movie-going audience is looking at a movie and saying this movie looks like it's not for me if the people in it don't look like me. I don't know. I'm sure there are some people out there who wouldn't see this movie because they're racist.
Yeah, but it seems like that's who they are. They're called racists.
But I mean, it's hard for me to picture that, you know, because it's like, I don't know. I remember back in the 80s, it's like even racists listened to Eddie Murphy and thought he was funny, you know? So it's like, I wonder who it is who's such an asshole that they don't want to go see Black Panther this weekend. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a key point to what you're posing, the question that you're posing, John, is the fact that this movie is not just like a gateway movie. Like, it's not just any film coming out that has to find an audience. That's why I keep going back to this idea that, like, the fact that Marvel being what it is, and specifically the MCU piece of Marvel, having this fucking juggernaut of a thing built where everybody wants to see every movie they put out. I mean, they really haven't had like movies that had truly missed. There's definitely some that have not made as much as others, but when you compare them to general box office, they've all been wildly successful films. And I think the fact that it's like it literally is like a springboard. That's how you view it in terms of like a box office movie going experience. The fact that a film like this has so much to offer to an audience that loves these films, these kinds of movies, so that, like what you're saying, like who really wouldn't want to see this? And I mean, it really is somebody who just is a racist. I mean, like literally, because, like you're saying, the Eddie Murphy stuff. Yeah, if you like comedy, you like to laugh, like fucking listen to it. What does it matter that he's black? You're the skin's different. But that's the conversation that we have around anything that people segregate things or, I just think it's so. I just think it's not to be underplayed at all how important Marvel's role, whatever you want to criticize them about, like with having people of color directing or in the films or women, whatever it is, it's probably all somewhat true. But at this moment, right now, they are putting a film out in theaters that's going to be the biggest movie of the year, possibly, with an all-black cast, the 18th movie in their franchise, and a character that they're building the next phase of their universe around. And that is wildly important. And I mean, I just think that, the fact that they have set this track for an audience to really have no, like you're basically saying, to really have no reason to not want to see this film. There's every possible reason to want to see this film. It's funny, there's action, it's a superhero film, it's an all-black cast, there's representation all over the place with women in the film that are strong and powerful as the men. It's just all there. I mean, like, it's gonna be massive, and I can't wait to hear people start to rave about it.
No, I'm the same.
I mean, you can probably hear it as I'm talking. Like, I'm getting pumped up. I want to go see it when we're done recording, pretty much.
Do you think that the decision to put this movie out in February, when it was made, when it was put on the calendar, was a shrewd move or a cautious move? Because we've had, successes early in the year in the last few years. Like Logan was sort of an early in the year movie, and then before that, Deadpool was a February release. Do you think this was put into that slot because now they know they have a slot, or do you think it was a cautious move because they themselves weren't sure what this movie was going to be when they put it on the schedule? I guess I just wonder if this movie would have been the big summer release if they had sort of known what they had when they scheduled it. Or do you think that's just, either way it works out for Marvel, whether it was a shrewd move or a cautious move, there's suddenly going to be nothing else in the movie landscape to take this movie on for the foreseeable future? It's got a few solid weeks, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is no doubt, in my opinion, a shrewd decision. Like, this is something, like, they know what they're doing. They know the lapse between the releases and what's coming out. Like, these studios plant their flags on all these dates years out. And I mean, Marvel's renowned for like having, their schedule out for like the next 5 years or whatever it is. And obviously things move, but everything you just said about the, Logan and Deadpool coming out this time of year, I mean, there's been a I don't know the right word, like a discovery, whatever, that, while, usually in August or, January, February of the year, like there historically have been really down times for box office. And even this year to this point has been such, like there really hasn't been a massive movie released in January, February. They've all been films that have held over from the winter releases like Jumanji and Greatest Showman. I believe that Marvel knew exactly what they had on their hands. They knew what they were getting with Ryan Coogler. They had to have some sort of idea where this story was going from what they knew was going to be involved with Civil War. Just knowing that Thor was coming out, 4 months before, and Infinity War is coming out 4 months after. Like, I don't doubt their decision making in terms of scheduling one bit. Like, I have full confidence that they knew. See, like, it's just this thing where, like, it's seen as like a negative thing sometimes, when it's like, it's such a system and it's such a machine, and they may have this idea of, like, they've done so successfully, like, with getting these very visionary storytelling focused filmmakers to work on their films and put out this great product. And some people criticize the way that all these movies feel like a Marvel movie or whatever it is, but they have a system that works for them on multiple fronts in terms of their output, the quality of the product, the way they release the movies, the marketing for the movies. Like, it is a well-oiled machine, and there's probably a dozen factors that went into them deciding to put it out this weekend. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's a long ass answer. I'm sorry about that. I just think it's like, I think they absolutely 100% knew what they were doing and why exactly they were picking, February 16th as the date that Black Panther would come out in 2018. Like, there's no doubt in my mind.
Do you think February is going to be Black Panther month again in a couple of years, or do you think they'll say, once they see what they've got, they'll move it to July?
There was space for this thing to move around a little bit, and I think that once they saw what it was, I guess, as it started to get made, or the vague outline of what it was going to be. I mean, it has some historical significance. This is Black History Month. I think they knew that on top of everything else, that this would be, if none of them come out any other month, like, I mean, every other month, like the next one's January, then the next one after that is August. None of that matters as much as this one does. Yeah, so it's important that this first one kind of has it's a late, even if it does fall under the, there's nothing exciting coming out in this month, let's drop this here. They still know, because Disney has a wealth of information that people would go. When people heard when this came out, I know somebody that planned so far ahead, just kind of mapped out some time, just like, hey, and this time in February, I'm just not coming to work. Okay, I know a lot of people that had that kind of set on their watches for a really long time, their calendars. So I think there is some significance. I think that a lot of it has to do with that. I think a lot of it has to do with the folklore behind this movie. Once it comes out, it is history. They want to be on the right side of history. They want to be like, okay, we put out this movie and we put it out on Black History Month and we did all this marketing, and you know what I mean? Like, Disney likes those sort of accomplishments. They like that feather in their hat, and they can brag about that shit forever. That could be that counter argument for the rest of that company's existence.
They also get there's a lot of obvious reason to put it out this weekend. They get an extended weekend for President's Day, so I mean it's the 4-day weekend of February. It's Black History Month. It's like, literally nothing's in theaters that people are seeing right now. I mean, there's everything is lined up for them just to knock this out of the park, and there's no doubt that it's going to.
Yeah, Disney loves nothing more than a money-making machine. And so, as I've said all along with these franchises, Marvel and the Star Wars stuff they do, as cynical as they are trying to make something good because they know they've got us right where they want us if the movies are good. And so, yes, all the capitalist forces in the world can sometimes align to make something that really feels kind of special, and I think this movie is definitely that.
For sure.
Oh yeah.
So here's my little silly tidbit: the actor that played young Zuri, the Forrest Whitaker character, his name, the actor's name, is Denzel Whitaker. He's not related to Denzel Washington or Forrest Whitaker.
Weird.
That's pretty incredible. Denzel Whitaker.
Well, that's it. Black Panther. You're probably not waiting for our take on this because you've probably already seen it or plan to, but hopefully you came back and checked out what we had to say about it. Let us know what you think about it. Obviously, if you want to hit us up on Facebook or movieshmovie.com, Twitter accounts, whatever. We have it all in the details for this podcast posting. You can obviously find us on Apple Podcasts, probably any platform that you're listening to podcasts on. Hopefully we're there. If we're not, you definitely need to let us know so that we can try to. We always say it, but it's really important. Just if you listen to us through Apple Podcasts, if you subscribe to us through that, it would be amazing if you could give us a rating or a star review or whatever it is that you have time to do. We would really appreciate it, and it always helps to help get our placement a little higher. People are searching for podcasts like our podcast about film and movie reviews and pop culture stuff like that, which we would appreciate, obviously. Of course, that's only if you have good things to say. If you don't, then just ignore everything I said. And don't say anything. Just, it's been good knowing you.
So long.
But yeah, good times. If you guys don't have anything else, I think that's going to wrap this episode up. Episode 208, Black Panther. We'll be back in a few weeks with a new episode. And yeah, as always, you made our day.
Bye.